Today I've got a project for you that I'm extremely excited about. I'm taking this Game Room Solutions 2-player arcade stick and converting it. So we're ripping out all the wiring, the zero delay encoders that we once used for USB just to use this on Mr. Raspberry Pi, my PC. We're getting rid of all that, and we're going to be rewiring it up with the Brook Retro Board. This is going to be pretty awesome. We're still going to have the same compatibility that we had with the other encoders, but with this, we're going to be able to use this on a bunch of different retro consoles like the Super Nintendo, the Dreamcast, the Sega Saturn, the PlayStation 1, and so much more. The GameCube, Nintendo 64, the list goes on and on. So in this video, I'm going to be wiring this up, talking about the different items that I needed to do this, and just going through the process, and then we'll test it out and I'll show you what it's all about. So what all do we actually need to get this done? Obviously, we need the retro board from Brook. This was a collaboration between Arcade Shock, Jason's Customs, and Brook, obviously. After the success of the Universal Fighting Board, they decided to work on this and get this out there, and I think it's pretty awesome. You see, there's a lot of connections on here. We're not going to be using all that stuff, but I'll go over everything that we're going to need and actually use. We're going to be doing 2 of them since we're doing a 2-player stick. Each board is for 1 player. So you could buy the board by itself for $60, or you could buy it as like a kit with most of the stuff we're going to use here, like this harness that just plugs in instead of wiring everything up on that side. This comes with everything needed. You have the 5-pin connector for Sanwa style sticks, and then all the ground cables and everything for all your buttons that you're going to need. I think that is pretty awesome. If you didn't want to use something like that, you could just wire everything up to the other side. Just, screw the cables in. Then the other thing that you get with the kit, or you could just buy separately, is this Neutrik Ethercon connector. So you can expand, how you connect the cables. And we'll talk about the cables in a second here, because you can either plug in the controller cable into the back of the board or use one of these, which I bought 2 of them to, kind of put them in the back of an arcade stick. And then the other thing is, obviously, if we're going to be using this for a ton of different consoles, we're going to need all these different cables. So, like I said, you could get the board itself for $60. You can get a kit that comes with the harness, the Neutrik little Ethercon thing, and a few other cables for, I believe it was $90. And then all these other cables are, they're around $12, $13 each. The kit does come with a USB one, get you rolling on certain systems, right? But these were just put up live on Amazon Japan recently, but in the US, they are sold through Arcade Shock. I'll put a link to both of them in the description if you want to check it out. But there's tons of cables: Famicom, NES, Super Nintendo, TurboGrafx, PC Engine, that kind of thing. There's a lot of compatibility with this, and it's pretty simple, especially with that 20-pin harness on how to hook everything up. So we're going to go ahead and go through that. All the other connections on the board, if you wanted to use them, they're things for like LEDs to indicate turbo functions and stuff like that. You could set up different things with using the thumbsticks that you would have on like a DualShock PlayStation controller, but most of these consoles don't need that, so it's not even really required. But you do have a lot of headers on the board to be able to be used for various different things, like a turbo key, turbo LED, all that good stuff, like I said, and player LEDs to indicate, players that are playing. If you want to connect all that stuff, you don't have to. But installing this, pretty simple. Just had to take a look at how everything is pinned out, and then I diagrammed the main systems that I want to use this for, because with this 2-player arcade stick that I have, it's limited in the fact that it has only 6 face buttons. I do have those 4 buttons up on the top, but I really wouldn't want to use those for anything. I just mainly need start and select, and then as many face buttons as possible. So I wanted to make sure that everything lined up for each of the consoles I was going to use this for. That way I would have to do very minimal, if any at all, configurations with the buttons, like within games and whatnot. For Super Nintendo, Dreamcast, Sega Saturn, all that stuff, the buttons, the way I wired them up, it's just fine. Everything works. PlayStation 1 was a little more tricky, or if I want to use it for PS2 or PS3, because you do have those additional buttons, L1, R1, L2, and R2. some games will use those. I mainly just want to use this for fighters, playing Street Fighter and stuff like that, that normally use 6 buttons. I never use a button for, 3 punches or 3 kicks, anything like that. But it would come in handy and make things a little easier if I had 8 buttons. So eventually I may change this out to a different stick. This was just kind of, let me get this going and see how this works and, make a final decision later. With PS1, I did have to make just one slight change on the button layout. I mean, it just had to line up with the way everything else is going to be wired up, because I'm not going to be rewiring the buttons. I'm just going to be changing the controller port. You know what I'm saying? Plugging that in and out. So I think on the PS1, the only thing I had to change was the R1 and R2 are what I'm going to use as the 6 face buttons instead of, L1 and R1, that type of thing. I'll see how that works out in practice, but eventually I'll probably either buy another board to use for something else that has 8 buttons, or I just may rip this stuff out and put it in something else. But I think for the most part, I should be good with everything I want to play on this. So installing everything was very simple, getting everything plugged in. The one thing I had to do after I finished all that, wiring everything up, like I said, very simple. The little Neutrik adapters, the Ethercon adapters, I do have to get them like stationary. The back of this Game Room Solutions board or kit, they do kind of fit in there, but I need to make sure they don't move around. So either I'll glue them down, screw them in, I'll figure something out. But at this time, I just wanted to make sure this thing worked. The one thing I had to do was flip those Sanwa joysticks the other way with their pins. Instead of facing right, I had to have them face left, because when I first tried it, it didn't work out as planned. I was like, wait, the stick's not working. But it was because up was actually down and down was actually up. Left was right, right was left. And then I was like, oh, because nothing was moving at first. I think I was pressing down on something where it should have scrolled down, but it can't scroll up. And I just thought it didn't work. And then I was like, wait a minute, and I messed around with it and I figured it out. Flipped the Sanwas back around, and then everything worked out great. This thing is flipping amazing. That's all I got to say. These buttons that I used in this arcade stick, they do have LEDs built into them. If I really wanted to, I could wire those up into something to power them. There is 5 volts and ground available on the retro boards, but I haven't really messed with that to see if I could power the LEDs on these buttons, because I actually don't want to keep these buttons in this 2-player kit. I eventually want to swap them out for some Sanwa buttons or something else. It's just this particular kit, with the way the button holes are drilled, the plexi kind of gets in the way a little bit, because it seems like the plexi is slightly smaller than the hole in the wood. So I'm going to have to Dremel the plexi a little bit to put Sanwas in there. So I'm not really too concerned about the LEDs. Like, I tested it by plugging in the ground and the power to an LED button on here, and then plugging it into the original encoder, and then plugging that into a USB powered battery bank, and it lit them up. But it's kind of stupid. Like, why am I going to go through all that trouble? But yeah, eventually I'm just going to swap the buttons around. But testing this thing out on all these different systems, it is freaking awesome to have this. I know some people probably wouldn't want like a 2-player stick, but I think these Game Room Solution 2-player sticks are awesome. I mean, I've been really digging them, but to be able to play all these games on these different systems, mainly fighters, that's all I really want to play. But hey, I could still play like the NES and, PC Engine on here. A lot of 2-button games, not a big deal, but I mostly wanted to use this for Super Nintendo, Dreamcast, Sega Saturn, and PS1 for all the different fighting games for those consoles, and it works out great. I'm super happy. I bought one of the kits from Arcade Shock. Brook did send me one for purpose of review with some controller cables, and when I got it in, I was just like, dude, I'm going to convert this 2-player stick. I'm just going to order another kit. Ordered them from Arcade Shock and showed up pretty quick. I ordered a bunch of buttons, a bunch of other parts for another project as well, so stay tuned for that. But yeah, I'm really happy that this all worked out, and pretty much without any issue. It was just mapping everything out and making sure I was actually wiring the buttons the way I wanted them to work. But hey, it's awesome. Wanted to share this with you guys. Really do appreciate it. And with that said, We'll catch you guys next time. Peace out, bye-bye, and boom. Bye.